Alright people, welcome back to another class. This is the second one that I've done today. I had 6 absents yesterday, so those that missed your class, you need to hurry up because we are doing the plant quiz literally tomorrow, and I did review session in class today. Anyways, my lovely little flower plant based border around, let's start. So today we're going to talk about, well, I gotta do my introduction. Today we're going to be talking about plants reproduction. We'll go into how plants reproduce, both sexually and asexually. We'll talk about the process of pollination, seed dispersal, germination. We'll also compare reproductive strategies in seedless and seed plants. Let's go. Alternation of generations. So plants, they have this very funny and, well, unique lifestyle. They're alternating of generations. They're alternating between two stages, so gametophytes and sporophytes. Gametophytes is when plants they produce haploid gametes, and by haploid gametes, I mean an egg and a sperm. That they will eventually go into fertilization, and then fertilize into this zygote, and that's what we call seeds, hopefully. Now, sporophytes is when this diploid zygotospore is created. All right, so we start by somewhere around here, mitosis, gametophyte. That's also a gametophyte, egg and well, I assume that's a sperm, but they fertilize and they become that. And then they eventually develop and go through mitosis to become this full flower. And here they will produce the male and female parts as a flower. And here I go back into meiosis and mitosis once again. This process repeats itself continuously. So for seedless plants like mosses, gametophyte is dominant. And for vascular plants like ferns, the sporophyte stage is dominant, but gametophytes can still live independently, perfectly just fine. So, now you may have the question, what does it mean to be, let's say, gametophyte dominant or sporophyte dominant? Well, the difference is simple. So, gametophyte dominant means that the gametophyte is the main part of an organism's life cycle. It means this part is extremely long and it takes up the majority of the life. And for mosses that don't have vascular tissues, this is the case. Now we're gonna talk about seedless plants. So, seedless plants they just don't have seeds. It means they will produce pollen, or to say, well, sperm. So pollen is essentially, as we can see here, pollen, they're essentially just well, sperm. So when you go out into the summer, and some of us that's addicted, sorry, not addicted, that has an allergy for pollen or grass and flower in general, and you get all of these cough and sneezes during the summer, whew, you're just allergic to the, well, how do I say this? You're just allergic to the sperms, essentially. All right. So male gametophyte develops into pollen, which the pollen carries the sperm, and the female gametophyte produces egg. Now, pollination in this process happens when the sperm attaches to the egg, or when it reaches or lands on the egg, and you don't have to like just be there. You just have to touch it and essentially land on there and land on that reproductive structure, and then you're going to fertilize. Very simple. Now, non-vascular, I just talked about that, and vascular, yeah. Seed plants, gametophytes. So seed plants, gametophytes, they're not free living. So their egg is just there. The egg can't move, but the pollen, the sperm can move. So male gametophytes develop into pollen, which is also called sperm cells, and then female gametophyte produces egg cells. Now pollination occurs when male, yeah, I just talked about that. Yep. Now we're gonna talk about gymnosperms. So gymnosperms, like a good example could potentially be pine tree, that produces corn. Cone. They have cone. They don't require water, so they don't have flagella to swim. So human sperms, they have flagella because they need to be active. They need to be dissolved in something. They have to be in a liquid to move. So for gymnosperms, they're different. They use pollen tubes to transport these sperm to eggs, which eliminates the need for water just completely. So you can see a pine life cycle. Seeding. So where does it start? It starts over here, yeah. Surface view of this little seed, I guess. And then you have this ovule, and then you have, well, it's there. And then you have the sperm, and then you have the egg. Yeah, both of these, they develop independently, and when they land, they get put into the tube. They will essentially fertilize, and this is the egg, the female gametophyte, and that's the pollen, or to say sperm, and it goes out. And fertilization means the zygote becomes an embryo that has all of these seeds, Dicot, and essentially it's going to develop through germination, and it's going to develop into this plant. Embryo has a very, very small supply of food. It's in its waterproof coat. You call these a seed. So why does it have a little bit amount of food? So they can't have too much, because the plant originally, it still needs to live. It can't just give all of its energy away to its seed that might not even fertilize, or might not even live. So the seed stays in the female structure until it's fully matured, and it will travel to a new area if conditions are favorable, and it will develop into a sporophyte and grow into a tree. Now, angiosperms are a little bit different. They are flowering plants. So even if you see an angiosperms that don't have a flower, you just gotta look more carefully. They gotta have a flower somewhere. So flower are a whole different stuff. I know this doesn't show, but I will analyze it here. So it have these parts. You don't have to know which part is doing what. That's just ridiculous, alright? I know you probably did this in grade 10, but it doesn't matter. So you're just gonna know which part is the males and females. Let's go through them. Though sepal, which is the one that I like to talk first, it's like the protection layer. It protects the flower from being attacked or eaten or fallen over, just in general. Petals, bright colors. They're used to attract pollinators. They have bright colors. They have good smells. That's why flowers smell good. And sometimes they're sweet. That's why some flower, when you eat them, they taste a little sweet. Stamen, they're the male. Alright, just like semen or whatever, how you call it. But stamen, they are the male part. Alright, they are the male reproductive organs, and they produce pollen that's consisting of filament and others. And anther, pistils, these three over here. So you see this blade, this here, and the ovary. These are all pistil. These all belong and classify into pistil. And pistil is the female part that houses the egg. So essentially, when it fertilizes, or when the sperm touches the egg, it's going to fertilize and grow in here. And that's it. Yeah, this structure, it's just for this single flower. So maybe other flowers, they have more something or less, or they don't even have a female or male parts, and we're going to talk about them in a second. Structural differences, exactly. So complete flowers, they have all parts that I just mentioned, the 4 parts mainly, because they're very, 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 very important. Incomplete flowers are often missing one, or potentially missing more. So perfect flowers are something, on the other hand, that we look at. So perfect flower have both male and female reproductive organs on the same plant, and imperfect flowers only have one, unfortunately. Monoecious plants, on one hand, it have both male and female flowers on the same plant, where dioecious only have one of them, so meaning the plant can either be male or female. Well, the video cut off for some reason. It doesn't matter. So remember, the difference between perfect and imperfect, monoecious and dioecious, it's just one is talking about flowers, and the other is just talking about plants in general, okay? It's plants in general. It could include trees or whatever. Now, pollination mechanics. So how does these flowers get pollinated? So they are mainly, and we call this mainly, we classify them into 2. So self-pollination and cross-pollination. When you have a tree, let's say a pine tree, and just so magically, your male part and your female part meet together, or to say the pollen and the egg and the sperm meets together, and you just self-fertilized. and you fertilize this little pine tree. Not you, but you get my point. This pine tree to fertilize a small pine tree somewhere, or it's going to be near it. So that's self-pollination. So self-pollination is bad because we like diversity. And that's what we have been talking about and valuing in this course. We like diversity. When things are diverse and they have different stuff, it means they're good. It means that they're less vulnerable to changes, and means they could survive. So the thing we're going to focus more on is cross-pollination. That's where pollen transfers between plants. You know, this flower, maybe a lily, could potentially pollinate with, let's say, a Windsor or whatever. So we're going to mainly focus on cross-pollination because that's more common. So a good example of cross-pollination is bianimal pollination. So these flowers, they're so colorful and they're so sweet, and sometimes they smell really good. You could stand outside and you could see a flower. Maybe it's winter right now, but in the summer you could stand outside and you just smell this very great smell, and you don't know where it's coming from. Well, it's probably the flowers near you, because when they're trying to pollinate and it's their pollination season, they're going to release that odor stronger than it has ever did before. And it's brightly colored, so it's going to attract something like a bumblebee or whatever stuff. It's going to go attract them, and it causes them to move them. So for example, this thing is looking good, so us humans, we might pick it up, or whatever, gorillas or whatever, they pick it up, they throw it somewhere else. They smell it, throw it somewhere else. Or you could have, they're very stingy and they sting onto you. And when you go out into the fields in the summer and play soccer, and then your shoes, you realize, oh, what are these? They're so stingy, they're getting into my shoes, Mom. These are plants. And the second that you took them off, and don't throw them in your garbage can, just throw them outside, you just help fertilize the plant. Yay! You are helping biodiversity. Now, wind pollination is far more common. Dandelions. So we blow them, and I know we blow them. They are surely an interest to humans, but normally they are supposed to count on wind. So wind will blow, and all of these pollens, they will get carried into the wind. So human eyes, we aren't so good at seeing things. Most of the time, at least. So when there's a bunch of pollen-covered sperm inside of the air, we can't actually see them. They're just there. We don't know if they're there. So that's when you're actually allergic. So because the wind is blowing up all of these pollen up into the air, and you're breathing in the air that has a percentage of pollen, and you're like, shoo, I'm sick, Mom. And then you realize you're smelling in some potential sperm cells, which is pretty funny. So when the wind pollination, the stigma extends beyond the petal, so the wind can actually blow the pollen away. Now, seeds. Sporophyte begins as a 2N cells, and by 2N I mean seeds begin developing when it's becoming a fertilized egg. So 2N cell, it means basically a diploid cell. It has twice the number of chromosomes than a haploid cell. Simple. And N is haploid, if you can't tell. So cell division eventually develops into an embryo with an appropriate number of seed leaves. Now remember this: monocots, dicots, 1 leaf, multiples of 3, or 4 or 5, whatever. Endosperm provides nutrients for the developing seed. Most monocot seed, dicot seed, they absorb most of the endosperm. They will leave, alright? When they grow up, they will leave. The seed matures with a tough coat for protection. So the endosperm, when they mature, they will create a seed coat, and eventually the seed will grow out of it, grow through it, and it will become a new plant. Now, developing ovules, they will turn into seed, and ovaries turn into fruit. So remember back a couple slides ago, we talked about how seeds developing here. When they are done developing, they will eventually, they don't just go to waste, alright? They come and become into something useful. So we talked a little bit about how, well, pollen gets around. We never talked about seed. So seed is something bigger. and this is a dandelion example I gotta talk about. So the wind, I just gave a dandelion example, but I was mainly talking about the flowers here. You're relying on the flowers to disperse your pollen, but it also applies to seeds. Dandelions are a good example. I just talked about it. Animals, the stingy one, I just talked about it. I forgot I had a slide like this. Water is the biggest thing. So you actually have some of these plants. They're so light, their density is lighter than water. So they're able to stay afloat. So most of the plants, actually, I'm pretty sure dandelion can. You throw them on a winter. You throw them on the water, and they will float. They will float above the water, and essentially they're going to travel down the riverbank and into some random place, and they're going to fertilize there. So fruits, I talked about this in diversity, I remember, but essentially, let's say a bear eats an apple, and then he poops out the apple with some fertilizers of his own, which is his poop. The apple is going to grow. The apple is going to grow into an apple tree, maybe a couple years, or even couple 10 couple years. And eventually it's going to grow up very far away from its parents. So plants, they don't like when their children are near them. They're not like humans, all right? Actually, that's arguable. Maybe your parents don't like you being around them either, but they just don't say it. So plants, when they can't move, they're stationary forever, and they will never move. If they start moving, that's not so good. So they don't move at all. They're just there. So we know they're just there. So that means there's only a limited amount of nutrients in the soil. So there's only that limited amount of food that the plant can absorb before it burns out of minerals. So it doesn't like another plant coming here and sharing all of these food with it. Instead, it likes to tell your kids, hey, get away from me as far as possible or you're going to die. Because how well do you think a small plant is going to do against a big tree? Not good at all. Seed germination. So it needs these proper conditions before the seeds actually starts to grow. Water, warmth, and oxygen. When a seed loses water, it will go into a state of dormancy. It slows metabolic processes. It just means the seed is there. It's still there, but it will just sleep, essentially. It doesn't do anything, and maybe one day, just when the condition met again, it will start developing and grow into a tree. Germination is the process of resuming growth after dormancy. So, as I just talked about, these seeds, when these conditions aren't met, they will go into sleep, or to say dormancy. And after the conditions are met, they will come back to grow, and that's called germination. So water causes the seeds to swell. It will break down the endosperm spore and release the nutrients. And that means cellular respiration can now occur. And that means this plant is alive. Metabolism resumes. Now, radicle is the first to appear. It emerges first, and it will develop into roots that goes down to the ground, depending on whether they are a monocot or a dicot, but they will develop into the ground, and they will absorb nutrients, so the plant can then develop stems. Hypocotyl is the first to appear above ground, and that is called stem in otherwise. So they have these first, all right? Radicals first, remember, and then hypocotyl exists. These first, always root. You need your food before you can live and make money. Dicots, the cotyledons are pulled out of the soil, while the monocots, they will remain in the soil for a good while. Methods of asexual reproduction. So we have been talking all about how plants can fertilize using an egg and a sperm cell, but we never talk about how can they just reproduce by themselves. So again, the methods of asexual reproduction are self-fertilization and us. So self-fertilization is just where plants reproduce without using the pollen at all. However, there's a big problem with asexual reproduction, and environments and ecosystems, they don't like asexual reproduction. When something keeps on doing asexual reproduction, it just lacks genetic diversity. You're using the same gene again and again, and you just don't know if that gene has a hidden disease that could potentially trigger a mutation or whatever. It's not good. whenever something lacks diversity, it's not good. So that's why self-fertilization is very rare. However, us humans, we're cruel. We like to do this. We do artificial propagation. We do division. We spit them. We graft them. We basically put where like a, let's say, a stem, and then we just put it on there. We put it on another plant, and then we somehow attach them together, and now there's a new plant growing. And then suddenly this plant doesn't grow anymore because we did something wrong inside of the stems. Oh no. And then we have layering, cutting. Well, okay, so these three are like similar: division, cuttings, tissue coating, or simple layering or grafting. These are pretty much similar. So layering is where the stem grows roots while still attached to the parent plants. That's a little bit weird and a little bit counterintuitive, but it's basically we're just doing unethical things. You don't need to remember this part at all, because so apparently UN, the United Nations, they updated their policies about humans on biodiversity, and they made that we can't experience all of these funny stuff, and we can't experiment with all of them anymore. We can only do a limited amount of experiments on these protected plants, because apparently UN thinks they are unethical, which they are, but at least we get to understand the world better. Yeah, that's it for this class. It's a very short class. I will do one more today.